Reading 85 from the Psychological Commentaries on the Teaching of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky by Dr. Maurice Nicoll, Volume 2. Quarmid Ugle, July 21, 1945. Further note on changing our level of being. On one occasion, Mr. Ouspensky said in so many words, "We must learn to isolate ourselves from life." He was speaking about the work formulation that there are two third forces or neutralizing forces in their broadest definition that we can be under. The neutralizing force of life and the neutralizing force of the work or esotericism. As you know, in this great formulation of these two quite different third forces, the ideas of life and the ideas of the work, we are told that the third force of life keeps personality active and the real essential part of us passive, and so ungrown. On the other hand, we are told that if we can feel the third force of the work, the position is reversed and the personality begins to become more passive, and the more essential part of us, the real side of us, begins to grow. Man was created a self-developing organism to practice a certain growth of essence, which, if you like, you can call a growth of the essential individuality. In life in general, this individual growth, which is latent in us all, does not take place. In certain stages of history, there have been no doubt better outer circumstances for this more individual growth, this unique growth of people's individuality to take place. From the work point of view, all attempts to standardize people, all wrong ideas of equality, are antagonistic to the fundamental conception behind our creation. Regimentation, mass production, machine-made people. All such viewpoints are totally antagonistic to the ideas behind esotericism in general. Man, says the work, is an unfinished creation, and he is left to finish himself, to complete himself. O used to say that there were certain periods in history when this possibility was more likely to be achieved, but now, as you know, the work says that we are faced by a general movement to political ideas which have as their aim a society of bees or a society of ants, a social organism in which no individuality is allowed. I think you will agree with me that this is dimly what we all understand. Now let us first of all talk about the third force of life and try to get a clear idea what third or neutralizing force means. War, for example, is one of the third forces of life because we must divide up what the work calls the neutralizing force of life into many different subcategories. War, as a third force, brings people together in a certain way. We all know this. Immediately war ends, a different third force comes into operation. This different third force again belongs to life. It is one of the variants of the general third force of life. You all saw what happened when the war ended. The war, of course, has not ended, but in the immediate sense, it has for the time being ceased. You saw instantly how things that were formerly united fell apart, and all sorts of quarrels broke out. People began to split up into antagonistic groups. But it is still all the same thing. It is still the third force of life, acting in different ways and under different guises. The third or neutralizing force is defined in the work as what brings two things into relationship. It is like a fulcrum or middle point of a seesaw that brings the two ends into relationship. Or it is like, chemically speaking, a catalyst that brings two otherwise inactive substances into relationship. The force of war brings certain nations into relationship as allies and certain other nations as enemies. If we try to study this force of life in our own relationships with one another, we shall see that it is precisely of the same kind. At one moment, we are great friends with those people and enemies of those people, and vice versa. Sometimes, through self-observation, we begin to get tired of taking sides. We notice after a time that when we feel very enthusiastic towards this person, we are usually feeling very antagonistic to that person. And there is a phrase in the work to this effect: life divides and the work unites. I think you will agree with me that through the influences of the work, which are different from the influences of life, a great many of you have been brought together and held in a certain relationship to one another which would have been impossible in life. So I return now to my opening sentence about isolating yourself from life. We have to practice a certain self-isolation from what is going on in life, which is always trying to divide people into antagonistic groups. What does it mean to practice isolation from life? I will say one thing to begin with, that if you believe that life is going to change completely and bring about an era of progress and human development, you will not be able to isolate yourself from life at the very beginning, at the very start of your work. You will always be thinking that life is going to get better soon, in spite of the fact that history does not show that this is so, save for very short periods possibly, and in spite of the fact that we are obviously living in one of the very worst periods of history. In other words, if you have this attitude mechanically acting in you, you will not be able to isolate yourself from the force of life in the right way. You will always be expecting life to be different, and although it is true that life is different at different moments and periods, yet you have to have a subtlety of understanding that enables you to see that it is always really just the same. It may be slightly better or slightly worse, but it is the same thing all the time, and this is what the work calls the third force or neutralizing force of life. Now, the third force or the neutralizing force of the work comes from a quite different source, and its effect is to change your being by making personality more passive and essence more active. I have often heard people say to me, "Why can't people get together and prevent all these horrors and disasters?" The answer is that with life as a neutralizing force, it is impossible to do so. Everyone thinks that he is conscious already. Everyone thinks, for example, that if war is going to break out again, he will refuse to fight. One used to hear this said over and over again in the war before the last one, and in fact, one always hears this echoed throughout history. Well, how is it that apparently men cannot learn, cannot remember, cannot alter things and prevent war once and for all? The work says that the answer is that man is not yet conscious, but is a mechanical being acted on by the various forces of the third force of life. It adds that man can come under another form of third force called the work, or called esotericism in general, and that if all humanity could do this, war would cease. War would cease because personality in people, or the acquired side that people have been taught or have imitated, would cease to be active in them. But for this to happen, there must be a quite different third force acting on them, quite different influences that they follow and seek and obey. Now, in this work, we seek at our very elementary stage to follow influences of a quite different kind from those that belong to life. We try in general to become much more conscious. We try to struggle with what the work teaches us to struggle with identifying, with personal emotions, with negative states, with wrong attitudes that make us have accounts against one another, and so on. In other words, we study how to come under the influences of a quite new third force, but new only in the sense that we have not followed it before and have not even perhaps known about it. Esoteric teaching is not new. It is more ancient than mankind, strictly speaking, but it is given in new forms in every age and to every nation. The trouble is that people will not work on themselves because they do not wish to. They expect everything to be better than it is and do not see that they themselves have to change for things to get better. But a few people can work and can begin to change things for themselves internally. A few people can become connected with a third force that does not belong to life itself. And this is what we are trying to do. And as I said, you can see for yourself that this third force with which we are trying to get into contact and to transmit does not tend to break up people, to divide them, but to unite them. On one occasion, O said, "For people to come together, for people to unite in the right way, they must learn a common language." Now you know, all of you, that we are trying to learn a common language in this work, and we are trying to study the same ideas and understand them, because the work is full of new ideas and full of practical instructions as to how we should work on ourselves. When you meet a work person, you are capable of speaking to him or her in a way that you cannot speak to a person in life who has never heard of any of the ideas of this work or any other forms of esotericism. You all know that if you talk to a person in life and even touch upon any of the ideas of this work, the person will begin to argue at once and probably become very hostile. What is the reason? The real reason is that this person in life instantly feels uneasy. He feels that in some way he is being attacked or depreciated. That is why it is so dangerous to speak of this work to people who have no magnetic center or who have not been prepared a little in some intelligent way, so that they can see a little bit beyond their immediate life interests. Everyone flatters himself, everyone has a very strong self-conceit, and everyone feels that he or she is right, quite apart from the fact that they may be very unhappy. That is why it is so difficult to speak to people about this work, because they very easily become suspicious and always become resentful. Yet, unless they can shift a little bit from their life basis and let some of the ideas of the work into their minds, they cannot change their fixed position in life. They belong to the great machinery of life that has made them what they are. They have the illusion that they are conscious. They have the illusion that they can do independently of life circumstances. They have the illusion that they are one person and do not see that they are many different people at different times. And they have many other illusions which you will study in this system of work. In other words, by these illusions, by their general attitude to human existence on this earth, they are completely under the power of the third force of life. They cannot isolate themselves from this prodigious force, which takes so many different aspects at different moments, and yet is always exactly the same force and always has exactly the same inner taste. For this reason, nothing extra can grow in them, and so the work says that they are like seeds, and that they live and die as seeds without undergoing any growth. In the language of the work, we are part of organic life, which is a sensitive film that surrounds this earth and transmits certain influences to the undeveloped tip of the twig of the great cosmic tree, which is our moon. This little twig formed by the earth and the moon is growing. From the work point of view, the moon is not a dead planet, a dead creature, but a growing one, and it is fed by all the useless suffering on the earth, all the useless pain. This is a very startling thought and sounds very strange to us. Our self-conceit is such that we even believe that this earth, this minute speck, is the only inhabited planet in the enormous universe of suns and galaxies. Even from this, you can see how enormous our native ignorance and our native egotism are. Now the work says that we are at a phase in our human existence at which it is possible to escape from serving the moon. The trouble is that through long established habit of mind, habit of feeling, habit of attitude, as well as other habits, we cannot wake up and cease to feed the moon with all our useless suffering. And having no right ideas about our existence on the earth, we cannot isolate ourselves from these life influences that keep us exactly where we are and keep us at our level of being. We might think that war would wake us up, make us become more conscious. Yet this is not the effect of war, although it may happen at certain moments of common danger, but we fall back afterwards into sleep because we cannot isolate ourselves from the third force of life. The picture changes, and we all start quarreling with one another. We are still governed by the blind cosmic forces under which we are, and under which we should not be. Now, in this work, we speak about ourselves and about self-change, about changing ourselves and coming under new influences ourselves. If we want to do this, we have to isolate ourselves from the force of life, and we have to do this in the fourth way, which is this work, without physically isolating ourselves. We have to do it here and now, in the midst of our present life. Recently, I was speaking about aim, and said that every one of you in the work must have some aim in connection with changing yourself. I said that people who are quite satisfied with the state of their being are not really suitable for this work. Do you want to change anything in yourself? Have you faced yourself with this question? Let me remind you of some of the characteristic phrases used in the work. One is, if you change your being, your life changes. Now, everyone probably wishes his or her life to change. Everyone feels he or she ought to have a better life. But the work says that your being attracts your life, and that if you want to change your life, you have to begin to work on yourself and change your being, which is constantly attracting this life that you made. In other words, you have to begin to quarrel with your being, with the kind of person you are. Now, this is quite impossible unless you observe your being from what you are taught to observe in this work. A very great difficulty lies here because everyone is quite satisfied with himself or herself. Owing to the action of buffers in us, which are like big blocks of wood, we live peaceably with ourselves without seeing all our contradictions. As you know, if these buffers which life has made in us and which lie in the personality were suddenly removed and we saw all our contradictions and became conscious at the same time, in all our different eyes, we would go mad. We could not stand such an experience. It would utterly destroy all our self-conceit and our self-complacency and our excellent estimation of ourselves. But the action of self-observation in the work makes us gradually conscious of our contradictions and gradually undermines this curious, static, frozen state that we are all in as regards ourselves. Then we can begin to work on our being because we begin to see at what level our being is. Sometimes some of us may catch glimpses of our state of being, and then we know how we feel about ourselves and our past life. At such moments we discover, or rather it is revealed to us, that we are nothing like what we suppose or imagine, and that imagination has played a tremendous part in making our life tolerable to ourselves, and pictures of ourselves have been our most darling possessions. Now, such glimpses make us willing to work on our own being, and this enables us to understand what it means when the work says that your life will not change unless your being changes. You begin to see the connection with yourself. A man with a great feeling for himself cannot see his being because he is blinded by his pictures of himself. But a man who has such an experience, as I have described above, such a revelation, begins to get a trace of feeling his own nothingness entering his consciousness, and this is exactly the germinal force of the work acting, the regenerative or third force of the work. As long as a man is entirely supported by success in life, how on earth can he feel such a force acting on him? Now, in order to isolate ourselves from life, apart from what has been said above, there are 3 great work practices that aid in this. The first is self-remembering. The second is non-identifying. And the third is non-considering, in the sense of not making accounts against others. If you practice self-remembering, non-identifying, and not making accounts against others, you will begin to isolate yourself from all the aspects of the third force of life. As a result, you begin to pass under the new third force of the work. This latter third force can change you because it will gradually make personality more passive. But if you are always under the third force of life exclusively, you cannot change. Your level of being will always remain the same, and you will always attract the same kind of experiences. This is what you all have to think about and try to see what is meant. Suppose that I am a poor man and I become a millionaire. I will be just the same as I was as regards my being. I will attract exactly the same kind of experiences. Why is this so? It is because life has made me a poor man, and then a rich man, but my being is just the same as before. But suppose I have some experience in the work and realize what my being is like, and no longer identify with myself as previously. Then, whether I am poor or rich, my life will begin to change because I am letting in a new influence, a new third force, the work. If you begin to see your level of being, you begin to have a quite new thing to think about and to work upon. That is why it is so important to observe yourself. Now, all this in this paper is quite fundamental and has been spoken of often before from different angles. The emphasis is laid upon the importance of isolating oneself from life because it is only through some form of isolating yourself from life that you can build anything up, that you can change, that you can, in short, do this work. If life is very strong and hypnotizes you completely, if you always see your aim as lying outside yourself, in the world, you will not be able to isolate yourself sufficiently from the terrific power of the third force of life. And you will not understand what the work is about changing oneself. We are all fitted into life in the very best way to work on ourselves. Our troubles, our grievances, our forms of blame are just what we have to work on through self-remembering, through non-identifying, through not making accounts against other people. But unless we observe ourselves, we can do none of these things. Remember, there is help, but our minds, our brains, if you like, get connected up by the senses, by the impact of the external visible world in the wrong way to receive it. First, we must be efficient in life before we start this work. Later, the ideas of the work, if received with understanding, begin to make a new set of connections, and these conduct help. These new connections, these new association paths, are our second education. This second education is what the work is about. But if you cannot begin to stop, to alter some of the old mechanical association paths, you cannot make a new set of connections capable of transmitting the influences of the work, that is, of the third force, which opens a higher level of understanding. We must, said Mr. Ouspensky, believe in higher man. We must believe there is something already there, higher than we are. We must believe in greater mind. Otherwise, our minds are closed. The way is shut, and we look downwards, like the animals, at the physical earth.